Welcome back, bienvenue, and all that jazz. It's time to talk about the books that I read in the month of August. So there are quite a few books to talk about here. So without further ado, let's jump straight into my statistics for the month. And as always, there will be timestamps down below. So if you're not a stats person, then you can always just skip these and get straight to the books. But in the month of August, I read 9 books, which totaled 4,624 pages. And I think basically all of these were immersion reading, meaning that I had the audiobook going and read along or was bouncing back and forth between audio and physical. And I've just found that that is like my jam on how I like to listen to things. So I also listened to 70 hours of audiobooking, and my average rating was quite high this month as well. It was 4.11, which just means I really liked pretty much all the books that I read, which friggin' love that for me. So my stats seem to just be holding steady at a little over a 4-star rating every month, which is awesome. So let's jump into those books. And as always, these will be in ascending star order. So we'll start with my least favorite read of the month and go all the way up to my favorite read of the month. First up, with 3 stars, we have the Jasad Heir by Sara Hashem. And so the biggest issue for this book with me is I found it just a little bit I mean, I don't want to be mean, but I found it a little bit mediocre. I was sucked in by the fact that it was kind of pitched as having Egyptian mythology, and I didn't really see the strong Egyptian mythology. Maybe it was like inspired by. There was definitely like a vibe of like, there was this major river and a lot of the cities were kind of organized around it, very a la the Nile. But as far as like the actual like core Egyptian mythology of like Osiris, Isis, Horus, Anubis, like all of that kind of stuff, or even just those archetypes of those types of gods or those types of stories with like Osiris being chopped up into bits and like brother jealousy. Like I don't know that the world building really had strong Egyptian mythology roots, at least not that I recognized. And maybe they didn't mean ancient Egypt, maybe they meant more like modern Egypt, so it was more like Muslim inspired. I'm not totally sure. So it was just like a weird combination of things, and it felt a little early 2000s dystopian. There was this competition element that was teased for quite a while, and then when it actually happened, like the competitions were a little lackluster in my opinion. So I don't know, it wasn't bad. Like I didn't hate read it, and I'm not mad that I read it, but I'm also not like happy that I read it. It was just very like ambivalent feels, which is kind of the worst. Then up next, I only gave this 3.5 stars, but I expected to totally hate it, and that was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, the first in her ACOTAR series. And this is very strongly fantasy romance, very emphasis on the romance, and I expected to go in and just completely hate it, and I was actually kind of entertained. The relationship between Feyre and Tamlin, and while it was like very melodramatic, it was kind of fun in like a weird way. So like I'm not mad that I read it, but it's also not like, oh yes, I just love this so much. It was like, it was good. Which is like, I never thought I'd say that about ACOTAR. I'll definitely be continuing on with, was it ACOMAF? I think is the next one, Court of Mist and Fury, which is, I feel like everybody's favorite. So hopefully I feel the same way. And the ACOMAF is just a hit, although I don't know, because I feel the looming, like, stupid alpha male coming, and I'm just like, oh. I know it's coming, and I don't want it to. Then up next, with also 3.5 stars, is The House of Always by Jen Lyons. This is book 4 in the larger Chorus of Dragons series, and this one was a little bit of a, it wasn't my favorite in the series by any means, and that's largely because we have been building to the big bad for quite a while, and while there was a reveal towards the end that I thought was really cool and it really set like an exciting stage for the conclusion book to this series, just we were hopping around in like past memories, and they were all kind of disjointed, and it didn't ever really feel like it totally came together in a way that I felt like necessitated this book existing. So I was just like a little bit annoyed. Like I still really like this world. I really like the characters. It feels very Dungeons and Dragons. Like the stakes are like epic, next level, world ending. Like it is so cool. The magic is next level. But just this book was kind of a chore. Then we're getting into my 4-star reads. And so my first 4-star read that I'll talk about was The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the conclusion to the original First Law trilogy. Again, I enjoyed this trilogy much more than I thought I would. I am much more of a plot-driven reader over a character-driven reader. That's not saying that I don't care about characters. I definitely want there to be like meaningful character progression and things like that. But I think that's where I kind of get held up on First Law, is that I don't really feel like there's satisfying character arcs. The plot was fine. It wasn't like a super standout plot. I think it was much more about like the exploration of character. And while the characters were cool and felt really fleshed out, and I really enjoyed them, especially Gloctus and her monologues and stuff like that, none of them really feel that different from where they started to where they ended. And I think that's kind of the point, how sometimes things are just cyclical, and when you think you're moving up, it's really just same shit, different day kind of vibes. So I get that there's like a certain level of like cynicism and satire to how this story is presented. But that being said, like, I don't know, like it wasn't a super satisfying way of concluding. And so I don't know, I go back and forth on it a lot because I think about it, which is good. And like in hindsight, the entire story that was told was really interesting. Especially I watched Leanna and Mara had a discussion about this series, and Leanna was sharing that some of the inspirations was kind of like the anti-Tolkien. And so like through that lens, it's interesting to think about. But also, like, the reading experience wasn't my favorite because you spend a lot of time going, like, what are we doing and where is this going? And then when you get there, the reveals were cool. There was some epic magic stuff towards the very end. So there was the huge climax, but then it's like, okay, but what was the point of any of it? And I think that that is some of the point. So I don't know. I go back and forth on this one a lot. So, like, I enjoyed the first Saw trilogy overall, but I'm still conflicted. Then my other 4-star read was Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick. This is the conclusion to the Rook and Rose trilogy. And this trilogy is a lot of fun. If you are a particularly character-driven reader and you kind of like sassy banter between your main characters, you like kind of a will they, won't they, you like a like kind of noir mystery vibe where we're kind of like almost Batman and Robining and like what is going on in this city and how do we fix the problem and like kind of that kind of stuff. I think that this series will really work for you. If you're looking for like the most epic of epic fantasy, this is not it. It is a smaller in scope story. It's not like whole nations or whole empires or anything like that. It's much more focused in this kind of main city. I don't know that we ever really see outside of the city, but this conclusion in particular, I felt like had really satisfying arcs where everybody ended up. I was really happy with. There was some late game twists that I was not expecting, and it was just a good old time. So if you're looking for kind of Batman and Robin, but in a Venetian setting, masks, one of the magic systems involves like a tarot-based system called Pattern. One of them is a little bit more scientific or like almost Fullmetal Alchemist feeling with drawing of runes and that kind of stuff called Numenatria. And I think that the series is great. I think that book 3 is probably the strongest book in the series, so it's always nice when the series actually concludes in a satisfying way. And now the trilogy is complete and fully out there, and I would highly recommend, if any of that sounds good, that you definitely give it a shot and pick it up for yourself. Now we're on to my 4.5-star reads, and the first of these that I'll talk about is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E.Schwab. This is book 1 in the Shades of Magic series. And I picked this up because Elle from Elliot Brooks is doing a Shades of Magic read-along to get ready for the Fragile Threads of Power, which is coming up at the end of September. And so I have read this entire trilogy before, but for some reason it's one of those ones like I read it and like nothing stuck, and like I couldn't remember anything about it beyond like the characters' names. And this series in particular reads very fast, has a very punchy plot, and the characters in the beginning feel a little bit like archetypal or like characters that you've seen before, but definitely they start to grow on you in surprising ways. And this story is surprisingly, like, I don't remember it being as dark as it was. With like some of the stuff is real dark, and it does it in a way that like isn't gruesome or grotesque, but you still definitely know that it's a very dark story that's being told. And so I think it's a lot of fun. I also appreciate that it is quite a fast read, because I definitely needed that in between some of these like other chunkier books that I was reading. And if you haven't somehow picked up the Shades of Magic yet, I would highly recommend that you do so. The magic is really cool. There's different levels. There's like people that can just manipulate single elements, 2 elements, 3 elements, and then there's these Antari, which are blood mages that can control all the elements. It's almost a little Avatar: The Last Airbender, but way darker and grimmer and grittier, and just so fun. These blood mages can also transport between 4 parallel worlds. And then my other 4.5-star read, Shocking the World, and it's House of Chains by Steven Erikson. This is book 4 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I did not expect to have such a good time with the Malazan book, and I think the secret sauce for me in this one is that the first 200 pages, we are only following the backstory of a single character, and it's a character that we met in Dead House Gates, and we get them really fleshed out. We get deeper looks into how some parts of the world work, and then we continue that character's arc and a lot of the arcs from that we were introduced to in Dead House Gates and really carry them forward. And I think that this connection to like a more interesting character that we have actually fleshed out is what I've been missing from Malazan the whole time, because you kind of meet these characters where they're at in whatever part of the story that you meet them in. But that's been one of my major complaints, is like people always talk about how they love these characters and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, how? Unless you really connect to the situation that this character is in, you don't know anything about them. You don't know any motivations. They're just kind of there doing what they're doing. And like is not super compelling to me. And while I wouldn't say that Karsa is particularly a likable character, he does some really messed up stuff, especially in his past. But just kind of getting to see a full arc, I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really cool and pretty good, and I'm into it. I really enjoyed all of those aspects, but I still think that, I don't know if it's Malazan or what, but I'm getting really fatigued by the need to have kind of assault on women in some form in basically every book in this series, it feels like. And it just feels a little overused, and I'm also like, does a cis-het white man really need to have assault against women in every single book? And I get that there's some arguments for, well, that's realistic in war, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I still don't know that it added to the story or needed to be there. Even just the beginning of this one, Karsa and his like roving troop and kind of like doing the whole pillaging thing. I'm like, did we need that? I don't know. But that aside, I finally really enjoyed a book in Malazan, and I hear that a lot of people really love book 5, which is Midnight Tides. So I'm hoping that the next book is also a banger for me, because the first one was great. Books 2 and 3, 2 especially, was not my jam. 3 was better, but it was a little, I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. And then book 4 was great. So I'm hoping book 5 is great, but I don't know. I feel like there's not really a strong consensus of which book in this series is people's favorite, which is great, because that means that it appeals to different readers at different times. But it also means that you don't totally know what you're getting when you're going into a big chunky Malazan book. But I am definitely going to be continuing on my journey through the Malazan Book of the Fallen with Midnight Tides, maybe in October, November. I don't totally remember, because this is a buddy read that I'm doing with Chris at A Fictional Escapist. But yeah, I actually liked a Malazan book. Who is she? Then we have my 2 5-star reads of the month, and I think the first one I'll talk about is The Rithmatist by Brandon Sanderson. This is a young adult novel that felt very Yu-Gi-Oh!, but if instead of cards, it was chalk monster drawings, and instead of like ancient Egyptian threat, it's some mysterious threat on a neighboring island where these chalk monsters are escaping into the wild, and like there's this whole military aspect to it where people are training to like control these chalk powers to fight this imminent threat. And it's just a lot of fun if you like a school setting, if you like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or any of those old like competition style shows. I think that it is a lot of fun and really unique and cool in a way that only Brandon Sanderson really can do. And I've been pushed for a long time to read The Rithmatist by Elle, because she kept saying, oh, you'll love it, you'll love it, you'll love it. And then I kept being like, So I finally picked it up, and now I'm annoyed because there's no real information on when the next book is coming, because it's supposed to be a series, but we've been waiting forever for book 2, and now I am also stuck waiting forever for book 2. But it is really good, so I would highly recommend, if that sounds interesting at all, that you check out The Rithmatist. And then the last book that I'm going to talk about, my favorite book of the month, was The Discord of Gods. This is the conclusion of The Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons, so this is book 5, and just the characters, the twists in the plot, the bonkers levels of magic. Like literally there is a section where a god summons a comet to crush another god, almost initiates an apocalyptic event, so other gods are trying to contain the, like, it is wild. Dragon battles. Ugh, like this is the stuff that I read fantasy for. Like it was so good. And just like the twists and turns on how to finally deal with the threat that we've been dealing with the whole time. And it was one of those situations where it's like, how did I not know that that was how we were going to do it? That makes so much sense. That is so good. And just like the ending was satisfying. The Chorus of Dragons is a weird series because book 5 was everything I read fantasy for. And we needed the setup of some of the first books, but then like book 4, I don't know how much I needed book 4. It's a weird series for me, but it was so worth the journey because book 5 was friggin' phenomenal. I can't say too much about it because we're 5 books into the series, but this is another one that's very much, if you're into the Gods Among Us trope, if you want epic levels of magic, if you want kind of disaster bi, I think is like a term that people really like to use for this, because we follow a bi main character. We see his blossoming romance with a female and a male character on page, and it is really fun to see those dynamics kind of play out as he's like, no, I don't like him, I do like him, I don't, and just the like back and forth, and just like the epic Dungeons and Dragons bonkers levels of magic in this world is so much fun and everything I read fantasy for. So if you know other series besides Forgotten Realms and The Chorus of Dragons that have this bonkers levels of magic and Gods Among Us, please leave your recommendations in the comments down below, because It is literally why I read fantasy. I was so excited with book 5. It was so good. But that will do it for all of the books that I managed to get to in the month of August. Please, if you want to leave a comment, let me know what your favorite book in the month of August was. Or if you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, maybe leave a skull for the Discord of Gods because the cover has that cool skull on it. But that will do it for today's video. So please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!